I myself am very familiar with what it's like to experience disconnection, internal mind chatter, and so many complications just as a result of not being curious, not asking the questions, and making assumptions. The thing about making assumptions is that you often don't realize you're making an assumption. I'm so grateful for this review that was left this month. The Intimate Marriage Podcast is a gem, and I've learned so much in the last couple of weeks binging on these episodes. It seems most episodes are tailored to a female audience, but as a man, I have found them very insightful and enjoyable to listen to. Thank you so much for leaving that review. And if you have not left a rating and a review for the Intimate Marriage Podcast, wherever you listen, please go ahead and do so now. I want to tell you about a few different couples that I have coached, and they all deal with the same problem. And I'm guessing that you probably do as well. So let me start by talking about a couple, two physicians. They have a lot of patience with relationship issues that they interact with. They work hard and are very well versed in a lot of the research that I draw on as a relationship and intimacy coach. And while coaching the two of them, it came out that they both thought one another's love language was acts of service. She was so sure she adores her husband, she values the marriage, and she was so clear that his love language is acts of service. He is a really devoted husband and wants to show up for her in wonderful ways. He also was very clear that her love language is acts of service. However, during coaching, what came out very unequivocally is that she was shocked to hear that he thought her love language was acts of service because for her, it's words of affirmation. And he also was very surprised because his love language is quality time and physical touch. But they didn't know it because they'd never discussed it before, no matter what your responsibilities are and who you're taking care of. And even if you yourself are a relationship coach, it's a completely different thing to be a client and have me guide you as you explore yourselves and one another and connect deeply. And that is exactly what happened with this couple. And it's not that they didn't know their own love languages. They just, based on what they observed in their marriage, assumed that they knew the answer without any conversation. And quite frankly, this is very understandable because, like any hardworking professionals, dual physician couple with a number of children, there is always so much to do. There are so many work responsibilities, so many household responsibilities, so many parenting responsibilities, keeping yourself healthy. There's just always so much to do. So if what you do is ask for help in sharing the burden of responsibilities and making dinner and asking your partner to clean up afterwards and vice versa, and who's doing the laundry, it's totally understandable that these two awesome individuals concluded that their spouse's love language was acts of service. But that has a lot more to do with the huge to-do lists and tasks and responsibilities in their lives than what actually has them feel loved. And in the context of my coaching them, it was so significant for them to just ask one another, right? I had them share what their love languages were, and it was so eye-opening. I coached another couple very recently, and they don't talk about sex in their marriage. He wants to. She's not so convinced it's important in any way. It's awkward and uncomfortable. At least this was the scenario before we started coaching together. And he had all kinds of assumptions about how she feels about having sex at all and having sex with him. And he had his experiences, he observed his wife, and he added it all up in a very logical manner and came to a conclusion, which it's understandable he came to, but because he never asked her, he didn't realize that his conclusion was actually false. And she also concluded all kinds of things about he must not find her attractive, and he's not interested in sex, and he is interested in that, based on no conversation, maybe a random facial expression. But the fact is that once she actually asked him how he felt about these particular sexual activities, his response, genuine, compassionate, non-judgmental, was just completely different than what she believed to be true. I myself am very familiar with what it's like to experience disconnection, internal mind chatter, and so many complications just as the result of not being curious, not asking the questions, and making assumptions. And the thing about making assumptions is that you often don't realize you're making an assumption. There's nothing to correct things. Once you're viewing things through your wrong lens, then whatever you perceive is going to support that. So when I was really trying very hard to completely dismantle my assumption making in my marriage, not to say that I never make any assumptions, but I wasn't going down rabbit holes and emotional journeys that were started by false assumptions. And so once I realized I had been doing that, what I'm going to share with you, it's going to sound so basic, but it really took a lot of courage. So I was sitting on the couch with my husband, and it was in the evening. The kids were in bed. And I was, in a very animated manner, telling a story about an experience I had had earlier in the day. And at one point, I took a breath, and he got up and walked out of the room. And when he left the room, I said this, I must have sounded like a 10-year-old girl. Like, I really had to find the courage. And I said to my husband, "Are you leaving the room because you find my story uninteresting? Like, do you find me boring?" And he looked at me like, just total surprise on his face. And he just laughed and he said, "No, I'm actually really interested. I just have to go to the bathroom. And it seemed like a good moment when you were taking a pause for me to just go to the bathroom so I can come back and fully concentrate and not be distracted by my full bladder." He didn't actually say all of that, but that was implied. I think I took about 24 or 48 hours from every time that I was making a determination, drawing a conclusion about what my husband was thinking or not thinking, what he was feeling or not feeling, what his motivation was. And I just asked. Obviously, I didn't randomly start asking that. I explained to him that the more aware I was becoming, the more I realized that I had stories I was telling myself, things that I was making up that felt as true as things that I know with certainty. And I wanted to really disentangle the things that are genuine truth and which are the ones that I basically projected on the situation and therefore are a reflection of my internal world rather than whatever I've concluded about him. And this particular example of my concluding that he just found me boring and uninteresting. And in fact, he just needed to go to the bathroom. And then he came back and asked me to continue and was very attentive. And I completed the whole arc of my story. But most of all, I felt like it was an epiphany because it just showed me so clearly that I was making things up. And when we make things up, it creates disconnection. We don't feel seen because we're not actually seeing the other person. And this ultimately is a form of unconscious, unintentional compromise because if I don't actually speak up about what's alive inside me and thereby access uncompromising intimacy, we really are like, what's that image? Strangers passing in the night, except that we're right there interacting directly with one another, but it's not with the truth of who we are. So, my recommendation to you, if there's any area of your life, whether it has to do with pickup and drop off of children, whether it has to do with particular sexual activities, whether it has to do with your partner's attention while you're telling a story, or love languages, or what kinds of things you want to do. Another client of mine who just adores high-end home furnishing stores and vintage stores, just she loves interior design. She has impeccable taste, and her husband, who's very devoted, would always go with her. And so he would often find a comfortable couch and sit there while she meandered. And sometimes they'd walk around together. And one day he had the courage to say he actually doesn't like home furnishing stores. He's not interested. And she was just shocked because she hadn't realized that he was there because he's devoted to her. She had made the assumption that he was interested and enjoyed it too, given all the hours and hours and hours they spent meandering around home furnishing stores. Well, now they don't go together. She goes and she feels great, and he doesn't go and he feels great. And there are no more assumptions being made about this, where a couple's been married for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, whatever it is, and one of them thinks they're doing well. They're happy together. Maybe things could be a little more delightful, but things are good. Things are peaceful. There aren't any problems. No troubled waters. And then the other spouse says, I want a divorce, or I'm really unhappy with our sex life, or it really bothers me when you who knows what. And the real motivation for this episode is so that you don't need to be blindsided by anything, because you're in contact with one another about everything important. And if you're in any way feeling badly because of your own mind chatter, figure out what you're assuming and ask your spouse a question. So I've wanted to give you a whole range of types of places where this can play out. We can make assumptions about our partner's intention when it comes to parenting. Anything we have a thought about, chances are you might be making an assumption when your thought is related to your spouse. So the reason that I have recorded this episode is to invite you to maybe start with something small, whatever that is. And if you've thought something is the way it is, go ahead and ask your partner what's real for them. And I'm guessing that some of the times they weren't assumptions. You were right. That is exactly what your partner prefers. But other times you'll be wrong. And you only will discover that because you ask your partner what they think, what they feel, what they desire. And until you do this enough, you don't know which are the things you're assuming and which you aren't. So start with something small, and any thoughts that you have about what is or isn't going well between you and your spouse, go ahead and ask a question and discover what the real truth is.